Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SG Innovate and our event today on MedTech Innovation, co-presented by SG Innovate and the Embassy of Denmark in Singapore. My name is Tuan from SG Innovate. For those of you who may not be as familiar with us, SG Innovate is a government-owned organization, and our mission and mandate is to help build and scale up startups across various sectors in AI, quantum technologies, medical technologies. In our past 2.5 years, we have invested in some 60 such startups, built a network of some 3,000 talent, and convened a community with interest in deep tech, like you, that number up to 27,000 across some 300 different events that we hold throughout the year. And this is some of our startups, especially in the MedTech portfolio, are now starting to venture overseas and looking into markets such as Scandinavia. And this is why our relationship with international friends is very important to help our companies grow beyond the shore of Singapore. Denmark, in particular, has been a great friend of Singapore and SG Innovate. We have had many joint conversations on blockchain, maritime innovation, and today on MedTech. Both countries have been ranked in the top 10 globally among the world's most innovative nations just this week in the World Competitiveness Yearbook. So without further ado, it is now my pleasure to invite Ambassador Dorte, Ambassador of Denmark to Singapore and Brunei, to say a few words to get us started. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to come back here to SG Innovate. It's always such a great pleasure to be here, because it feels like this is where the magic happens. This is where the wheels meet the road, and that's an exciting feeling. So thank you very much. And you're right in saying that Denmark and Singapore have lots to share and are good friends. Now, MedTech and commercialization of MedTech is a big issue, both in Denmark and Singapore. We are countries that focus a lot on finding scientific solutions to problems as a way of generating growth and economic development in our countries. Both Singapore and Denmark invest heavily in research and development. We are actually some of only very few countries in the world, 6 in total, who invest more than 3% of our GDP into science and development. So this is a huge investment by society, by all of us, via our tax money to put into it. So we also hope to see some bang for our buck, to get something back to society in terms of economic development and in terms of solutions that are put into use to improve our healthcare. This has not always been a one-to-one relationship. I don't think I lie to anyone if I say that we have not had as much commercial success in the past in Denmark as we had hoped with such a massive investment. And I know for a fact that the same goes for Singapore, which has invested, like Denmark, heavily in medicines and in health research. In Denmark, more than a third of our entire budget for research goes into health and medicine. So it is a hugely prioritized area. So we really want to get more commercial use out of it. Looking from the solution side and the need side, we also simply have to make it work, because finding solutions to keeping our health system sustainable in a time where financial strains are there, where manpower strains are there, is the essential question for both of our societies while they're aging and we have less immigration. So we have to get it right. In Denmark, we have come some way. On the pharma side, we are a world leader in several medicines, including for diabetes treatment and for dementia and for for dermatological reasons, eczema, etc. These are some of the areas where we have some of the world leaders in pharma. And it all actually stems from the fact that Denmark is an agricultural country. So we can thank pigs and beer production and so on for our advances in life sciences. That has generated our entire life science industry with a focus on science and research. Now MedTech is the new and upcoming thing. And I think that's where we will see much more growth in the future, actually, than on the pharma side. MedTech is a very broad definition that covers many different things, and we don't try and define it as some specific thing, but it's assistive technologies, it's sensory technologies, it's any kind of accessory that's used to provide medicine. So it's very broad. And in Denmark, the cluster encompasses maybe around 1,000 companies, employs around 15,000 people. So it's quite an upcoming industry. It's funny actually that Denmark, a country with the same population size as Singapore, we supply half of the world's hearing aids. But the biggest MedTech company in Denmark is not a hearing aid company. It's actually a company that produces stomy bags and incontinence care. So, you know, we're in all specters of life here. They produce about 25% of our exports in MedTech. More will be coming. The application of light and sound in medicine will be important in development of MedTech. But also, and maybe most importantly of all, the use of data in how we use medicine. So any kind of data-driven industry will be key in the future. That's also why one of our big focus areas in our collaboration with Singapore is on how we use data. In Denmark, we've had a very digitalized healthcare for many years, and we have data on all our citizens that goes back almost 50 years. So that means that we have a very, very strong data platform for analyzing how medicine works on different people. In Singapore, it's more of a new data, or new date that you have this data available, but you have a much more diverse makeup of your population, different ethnic varieties, and that makes it very interesting for us to test some of our solutions in a more varied spectrum. Therefore, A*STAR, together with Danish Technical University, have signed an MOU on the use of precision data and bioinformatics, and I hope to see this also generate opportunities for companies who are interested in providing solutions in this field. There's lots we can do together, and we really must find ways to do it. If you are companies in Singapore who are looking to Denmark or Scandinavia as a test market for your solutions, I really think that you should come and have a look. Because in Denmark we have tried to do a lot to help companies get traction and get immediate access to universities, to hospitals, and to the municipalities that provide most of the primary care in Denmark. We established a new overarching Danish network for innovation in health tech at the end of last year. What's it called? It's called Healthcare Tech Denmark, and this encompasses 4 universities and 4 clusters, eco-clusters in this field, and all the municipalities. So they are working together to get the companies access to the data, access to the patients, so you can test it together with the patients and co-create it with the patients. This is something we expect a lot from. But this is not the only way you can engage in Denmark. There's also another, which is a totally private initiative that came out last year. This was the biggest private donation ever made in Denmark by the Novo Nordisk Foundation. They founded what is called the Bio-Innovation Institute, and they have an acceleration program for MedTech and biotech companies there that is, I think, very exciting. So have a look at that and try and apply to the Bio-Innovation Institute and see if you can get into this acceleration thing. It's open for international companies as well. So please have a look at that. And if you are thinking to go that way, contact us at the Danish Embassy. We'll get in touch with our colleagues back home and with Invest in Denmark to try and get you hooked up with whoever you need to talk to. Sometimes it can be a huge investment to go to visit a market to see if it makes sense for you. And you might only have few questions around which data can I get, what is the makeup of the patient group, etc. If it's just this kind of limited information you need, maybe we can get it for you. So please be in touch and we'll see if we can help you. I don't think I'll say much more now. It's Friday afternoon and well, we can't overload you with facts, but please know where to find us and then we will see what we can do to help you coming to Scandinavia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Dorte. We hear you loud and clear. Now we have another very exciting panel to bring us through the MedTech excellence story of Denmark and Singapore. And my colleague and teammate from our venture building team, Simon, would now to take us forward with the panel discussion. Simon, please.
Thanks, Tom. Ambassador, friends of SG Innovate, Thank you very much for coming down this Friday afternoon for this discussion on commercialization of MedTech, both from a Singapore perspective, but also from a Danish perspective, which will be very interesting. I think we should get the panelists up. Sydney, Lisa, Yao Ki, Martin, please come up, and we can kick things right off. Yeah, please. Yeah, if you could just sit at the end there, Martin, thanks. Okay. So I think I'm never a big fan of me introducing other people, so I think I'll kick it right off and ask my fantastic panelists if they could introduce themselves and maybe spend a couple of minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, just sharing a little bit. I know there are very diverse perspectives here, but sharing a little bit about what you're focusing on in the medtech or the healthcare space at the moment. Sydney?
Okay, thank you, Simon. Ambassador, thank you for the very interesting introduction of the Danish ecosystem. We certainly hope that we will have a lot more opportunity to collaborate together. So my name is Sydney. I'm from a Diagnostics Development Hub. I'm also the Senior Advisor to Accelerate, which is the commercialization arm of A-Star. So at DXD Hub, basically sort of the reason for the conceptualization of DXD Hub was precisely what the ambassador had spoken about earlier, is really targeting that commercialization. How do we increase the flow rate from intellectual property, the different innovations, the technologies that we have developed, and take them to market? DXD Hub focuses very narrowly in the space of MedTech diagnostics. So MedTech is very wide area. We focus on the area where it has to do with diagnostics. So anything that has an application that has to do with diagnostics is something that DXD Hub is able to help with. So we value add in precisely the place of building the product. So we are really a product developing engine. We have a quality management system. We take a product all the way from bench to market, regulatory approval, take them to market, get your first sale. So we would like to think the engine that we have built as not really an engine to build products, but actually is an engine to help you build your business. As the senior advisor to Accelerate, we also develop other tools to help with our entrepreneurs in the MedTech space. And we're quite happy to talk to any one of you that is in the space of diagnostics or other area of deep tech and see if we can collaborate further. Thank you. He said 1 to 2 minutes, so.
I think that was fine. Thanks, Sydney. Please, Lisa.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Lisa. I am from the Singapore Economic Development Board. So the EDB is, I guess, the lead economic agency here in Singapore. And where I am at, I focus mainly on ecosystem development and specifically in healthcare innovation. So I think this spans biopharmaceuticals, medical technology, as well as digital health as the 3 focus areas for the group.
Hi everyone, my name is Yao Ki. I'm the founder of SoundEye. So in fact, I was an ESA researcher for 11 years before I decided to spin off the company SoundEye. In fact, Sydney is assisting SoundEye in a various manner. So we are funded by NUS Enterprise, they are Angel. We just received our seed funding from a Japanese corporate, so we'll be expanding to Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. So what does SoundEye do is, we make sense of different sounds. Speech recognition, convert speech to text. We don't do that. We make sense of gunshots, explosion, etc. So when we start off, we use the sound recognition technology for elder care. People scream for help, we detect that. Somehow we are also invited to participate in projects related to workspace safety. People scream for help in the server room when they are alone, they get injured. This year, we have a project with Changi to deploy our technology in Changi Airport. We're going to increase the productivity of the security guards because they have too many cameras to look at, don't know which one to look at. We will tell them, hey, I think I heard explosion, people scream for help, weird noise, look at this video camera. So more or less, twist of fate that we solve elder care. Elder care, to be honest, is a very challenging kind of domain by itself, because the journey to generate revenue is not a straight line. It's always up, down, left, right, So yeah, we're giving opportunity of our workspace safety, surveillance, smart building applications. Now, somehow, elder care domain look at us as one of possibility great partners here. So yeah, sometimes you have to go back to around full circle, to reach your destination. Okay, I think that's all.
Thanks, Yauki. So I've asked Martin, as he introduces himself, to also share with us a little bit about the Danish ecosystem. I think we could all do with a little bit more understanding on that. Maybe some of us aren't so familiar with what's happening over there. So please share with us a little bit about yourself and what you're focusing on, but also about Medicon Valley and your work at InnoX Health.
Yeah, I will try to do that. And thank you for having me here. It's so wonderful, so many people showed up Friday afternoon. I'm quite impressed. Thank you for that. My background is being an MD, and I have a PhD in innovation and telemedicine. And the inspiration for working with innovation and entrepreneurship came up when I was a medical student, where I helped or came up with an idea to change the way we run logistics in departments where we do surgery. And we actually increased productivity with 25% with using data and data flow to increase patient flow to surgery areas. So that was when I got inspired to work into this field, because I could see there was a lot of possibilities to use my skills as clinician and doctors in other areas, and mainly in the area of innovation and entrepreneurship, and then MedTech. And it led me to help start up InnoX. InnoX is a small unit at the University of Aarhus University, where we try to educate the medical students, doctors, future doctors, but also people in businesses working already in clinical settings, to get better at going from concept to something that can go in direction of a company. And if we look at the pipeline, we are out on the really, really far side of the pipeline, because we are taking in students when they are young, green, and naive, and we are trying to learn them how to think as an entrepreneur. And in my opinion, we have for a while perhaps forgotten that when we work at universities in Scandinavia, at least. We've been very focusing on giving skills in regard to a clinical setting or working as a doctor, but not as much as being creative and being somebody who want to join a team and do startups. So we are trying to re-innovate the way we educate and try to give skills to people so they are actually better at coming up with ideas and try to solve the solutions that are facing in their everyday work, instead of just try to navigate around them. So that's like our main goal in InnoX. And we are very much into need-driven innovation that I know that you guys also work with at A-Star, and are part of a big international network where we work with need-driven innovation. We also have a setup where we received a lot of funding from the Novo Nordisk Foundation in Denmark, and they look at us as a pipeline for what the ambassador mentioned, the BII, the Bio Innovation Institute, because they see that they need people to apply for the BII that has the skills that we are trying to apply for them. So we have a 10-month fellowship program where people can apply each year for 16 spots. And this year we got 153 applications from highly skilled young people who want to come to Denmark or change their path of career to try to see if they could get better at being innovative and entrepreneurs. And you're more than welcome to look up that program and try to apply for it, because we received applications from all over the world. That was, I think, InnoX, our ecosystem. Yeah, please. It's diverse, it's complicated, it's interesting, and we have a lot of stakeholders. I think you guys here has a lot of similarities to what we have here in Denmark named the Innovation Foundation, where we have a foundation that are looked as pretty much as a VC that supports early stage funding for researchers or people from business who has some kind of project that has the scope of spin out as a company. And they have different programs where they support with the early seed money or money in a bigger scale for actually scaling an already proven idea. So that's from the government part. There are more initiatives supported by the government in municipality level or regional level, where people outside the main government is also trying to support businesses or researchers or students that have some kind of idea they want to scale as a business. But it's not only from the government part we receive funding. We can see in Denmark that more and more VCs are actually starting to support the MedTech area. It's slow, but I think in my perspective, it's mostly people that have been getting some funding from a company they have been doing by themselves, and then they have sold it, and then they have perhaps get that money from outside, from the US or from Asia, and then they come back to Denmark, and they feel some kind of obligations to actually try to support the startup environment in Denmark. And we are trying to support that, and we just talked about it before the setting here, how can we do that? And I think we will touch that topic again. But there is a change in Denmark where VCs are getting more visible in the MedTech area, and we can also see that we are getting more traction from international VCs that look to Denmark. And it has perhaps something to do with the culture, the flat hierarchy. It's easier to penetrate into decision makers, but also data. We have a lot of data. And it's interesting if you want to test your MedTech devices that you can actually hook up in a living lab that has the size of Denmark. Because that's one of the possibilities I think we can offer in Denmark. We have a living lab that if you do it right and negotiate right and talk to the right people, you can look at it as one big living lab.
Fantastic. So I think today we really want to discuss the ways in which maybe Singapore and Denmark can collaborate, maybe learn from each other as well. So to do that, I want to, in the next 45 or so minutes, go through 3 different areas. I want to have a quick discussion about what the respective ecosystems are good at. And follow that up with a discussion about some of our challenges maybe, whether they're shared challenges or a little bit different and how we're managing those, and finish on ways in which we can work together. So I think with that, for anyone who hasn't been here before, we do really enjoy quite robust discussions. So we have Slido up there. If you would like to ask questions, please log into Slido, use the hashtag MedTech, and I can see them on the iPad up here, and we can ask some of those questions. And also to my panelists as well, if you would like to offer a different perspective on someone's comment or add something, please feel free to jump in. It is Friday afternoon. We want this to be nice and casual, so feel free. I think, when we think about Singapore and Denmark, there's a lot of similarities, right? They're about the same size. They're both small markets, but they're both small markets within much larger strategic markets. So I'm quite interested in learning, I think, and the panelists' perspectives about what we're good at and what we're not good at. And it will be interesting to see whether maybe there's a few similarities or quite different. So maybe I can throw first to Sydney, then Lisa, from both your perspectives. I mean, you've spent a lot of time in the ecosystem here. Maybe, I'm not sure if you would disagree about what we're good at, but we can find out, I think. What do you think Singapore's real advantage sits?
So I guess perhaps Martin touched on some of that too, and you did too. What we do have a very proactive and supportive government in terms of supporting, putting different tools in supporting the build-up of the ecosystem. And I think that So I suppose people like to talk about Singapore as being very risk averse. In fact, the government, that's because our government is probably the most risk embracing. All the risks are actually taken. The first step is normally taken by the government in building a lot of these bridges. Take SG Innovate, for example. It's government funded to put in all these ecosystems together. And DXD Hub is another government funded entity that helps bridge that very, very challenging stage between proof of concept and actually having a product that someone is willing to pay for. And that brings me to really the challenge in MedTech investments. And I think that the biggest challenge in MedTech investment is always that for MedTech devices, slightly different from pharmaceutical. MedTech devices, the challenge is really in not so much building it, it's in actually someone paying for it, which is slightly different from a pharmaceutical drug. It's more in building it. So in someone paying for it, that means you as a company, in order to get investments, you actually need to prove the market is the proof of market is the most challenging part. And that's really what some of the initiative like DXT Hub is really there for, is really help you prove the market. So that's really one of some of the examples of how I feel that the government in Singapore has been really, really proactive. It's not even reactive. There are some instances where we're more reactive, for example. And in areas like also supporting early stage investments in all kinds of deep tech, including MedTech investments. Just to give you a little bit of stats, just looking at the ecosystem that we are involved in, the ecosystem of the A-star startup portfolios, including Sound Eye and the DXT Hub community. Last year alone, our community has collectively raised over 200 million. Wow. Just last year alone. And that has grown exponentially from the year before. The year before was, if I remember my numbers correct, maybe 100 million. And then the year before that was 20 million. So, and in terms of where we stand, that 200 million is about 1/3 of the entire funds raised by all of Singapore's investments in the space of Series A, so early stage and Series A investment. And that's across all technologies. In fact, some not even technologies. And our investments are mainly in the deep tech area. So that really is only possible because, you know, it's not because some investors just decided that they want to come in and invest in our companies, because you actually need to show them some evidence that proof of market really is only possible, not due to one company or one entrepreneur. I mean, that I would call it luck. But it's really the ecosystem, having the infrastructure to help, not one company, but a community. And obviously, when you have a good investment, it attracts other people who want to come in and invest some more. When you have people invest money that's coming in, it attracts entrepreneurs, talent that want to come to Singapore. And they kind of just sort of build on each other. So we see that as one of the you know, possible reason why we're seeing this growth. And this year, we're only into half the year of this fiscal year. We're seeing the trend continuing to you know, to develop. So I don't know whether they answer your question, but yeah.
I think so, very good. I'm interested to see whether Lisa has the same opinion or something a little bit different.
I mean, seeming that both of us come from entities that are funded by the government. So, I mean, I think what Singapore probably needs is not unique to Singapore, and I think it would be more talent. So I think there's a global war for talent, basically, especially people who are multilingual in terms of the science and technical aspects, the business aspects, the ability to understand what makes a product and how can it be adopted. So I think there's a global war for talent, and increasingly we see these virtuous cycles. So like Sydney said, if you have an investment community, you have these entrepreneurs, you have the universities or hospitals and train people on those fronts to help you make a product. Those tend to be deep nucleating factors where globally talent go to these capitals of innovation. And I think Singapore aspires to be one of these globally. And I think it's a continual race, and the government's thinking about the talent effort. How can we make Singapore more attractive globally for Singaporeans as well as people who call Singapore home, who call Singapore their base? And how can we get these communities started? So I think that's an area that Singapore is building towards. What Singapore, I think, is good at, I think there are still many similarities with Denmark. And I think one part of that is data. So Singapore, I think if you look at our economic transformation from the 1960s, when really we were just trying to get people employed. We had a lot of more low-skilled, labor-intensive industries, moving then to, you know, electronics and then chemicals, and now biomedical, and medical technology is a big part of that. I think we have strengths in the engineering and data side of things that I hope that we could actually lend that and transfer those skill sets into the medical technology space. And we also have a unique system in that we have unique national identifier numbers for every Singaporean in the system, so that your records are actually tracked by your identity card number. So that's a very important attribute that helps make the Singapore database interesting to a medical technology innovator. I think that's one. We have a unique system when a lot of the medical costs of the country is actually borne by the government. So when you try to look at, I think in medical technology, you start to look at outcomes, because we're shifting from more of a procedural-based medical system to one that's outcomes-based, right? Like exactly, does your intervention lead to improved quality of life or improved health span for the person? So I think in a system like ours, you would be able to then actually track some of these outcomes, because a lot of that payment's actually made by the government. And in addition to that, a lot of the healthcare system, especially in the tertiary setting, is in the public healthcare system. So again, there you'll be able to track a lot of these medical data and health data that I think could be interesting to a medical technology company. So I think, so in sum, I think what Singapore could do better at is talent, and thinking about how we grow, how we groom, how we attract, and how do we get talent, international talent, to stay in Singapore and stick here. And then on the good part of what Singapore can do, I think, is trying to bring some of the engineering talent into this adjacent area of medical technology, and the data piece from building on the national infrastructure that's already in place.
Great. So I think, thanks for that, Lisa, and thanks for jumping, I think, to some of the challenges, because we can talk about, what we're good at for a lot, but I think a lot more comes from actually talking about our challenges and maybe our gaps. And it's nice to note that there are some pretty good similarities, I think, between Singapore and Denmark around government support and funding. It seems to be both quite strong. Maybe there is some advantages that Denmark has in comparison to Singapore in terms of retaining talent, attracting new talent, perhaps. I know this is something you're very passionate about, Martin. Do you think that Denmark has, relative to maybe not the US, but do you think Denmark has a talent issue? Is this something that is top of the national agenda, or are you quietly confident in your abilities to attract and retain these fantastic CEOs and entrepreneurs?
I think we, like the rest of the world, have an issue with talent. And I think we need to be aware that that is not declining if we're not doing something in regard to create more talent in this area. We can see that the young and skilled people in Denmark spend a lot of time educating and take their education and graduate. And when they are graduating in Denmark, they're pretty old compared to many other places in the world, meaning they are also settling down. And if you want to pick up people that have a passion and a drive and want to go in the direction of starting a company, it might be a bit too late if they're having 2 kids. Then they'll be looking for a job that has a steady income instead of that. So we have a talent issue in many ways, compared with not only giving them the skills that they need, but also find a way so we can actually motivate these people to keep on track and going in the direction of actually go out and be entrepreneurs and make startups. And that is one of the things that I think we need to address when we are trying to face the issue with talent. And then in regard to recruiting, we have some... Denmark is known as a safe place to stay. It's known for happy people. We're one of the happiest places in the world to live. And the ecosystem of being in Denmark is attractive to many people. But it's not enough. There's also the salary, there's also the tax system. There's many things that makes people take the decision of actually coming to Denmark. So we have something that is recruiting and something that is positive and making it us easier to get people to come to Denmark. But it also rains in Denmark. And it's also cloudy and it's also cold in the winter time. So a lot of stuff is going on. But I think the main thing here is we have to get them out there early on. We have to get them going in the direction of being entrepreneurs earlier on than we're doing today.
Great. So look, I think this relates to one of the questions that we've been asked as well. In Singapore, I think we have a lot of data, but there have been some recent issues that have maybe made us pull back on some of the early stage work that some of our startups are doing with healthcare providers and patients and things like that. What's the kind of environment like in Denmark in terms of, how you mentioned this living lab, but there were some barriers around perhaps integrating with that sort of data sets and using those in your companies. Can you share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of possibilities in Denmark because, as you guys have, we have what we call a central personal system. It's a system where we can keep track of everybody's health record and what they've been doing, and we can do it across a lot of databases. But just because they're in one database doesn't mean that it's easy to connect them. So we have a lot of columns of data standing in our system, and it's a challenge to connect all the data. We're getting better at it, but then there's the regulatory issues about doing this. That's also a challenge. And then we have the ethical issues in regard to that, building on top of it. So there's a lot of steps that we have to handle. And in the clinical setting, I'm not saying there's two religious departments in regard to data, but it's close. There are people that are really into data, that love them, and think that we will solve the ethical issues when we face them. And then there is a group of doctors that think this is the patient's data, and we don't have any right to look into them and do any comparison across databases. And this is, I'm not saying the schools are at the same size, but it's something that takes up a lot of space in debating how to use data. So I'm one of the people that think we have a lot of potentials, but we also have to talk about the ethical issues in bringing these data into the game. And when you look at the data in Denmark, and you look at the people that are funding much of the research done in connection to that, that might also be private companies. That might be Novo. That might be Leo. That might be the companies that are creating some of the drugs, the pharma companies that can see a potential in these data. Then we have another ethical issues. Should we take funding from private companies to try and go out and create solutions where we can build perhaps better lives, increase health rate, quality of life, based on a business case for a pharmaceutical company in the future? And that's something that we also are debating. And the last thing that we are debating right now in Denmark is that we have a human genome center just starting up, received a lot of money. We are collecting biodata by So how to combine that? We will have an up and running big genome database, and we are already collecting a lot of data into that. So we can go all the way from cell to grave.
Great. That sounds very exciting. So I guess, Yao Ki, as the entrepreneur on the panel, everything I'm sure doesn't go as smoothly as we would all hope, right? There are maybe gaps in capability or potholes in the road. Where do you see that there's been really challenges in your entrepreneurial journey here in Singapore?
In fact, I've started since, I started off 3 years ago, but the idea has been floating up nearly 5 years, really. So while I was a researcher back in Asia, I was thinking about how to commercialize the technology that we have for elder care. Unfortunately, 5 years ago in Singapore, elder care was not that mature. We're still figuring out a lot of all these grants, all these kind of a support for elder care. I guess that's the first challenge that any startups will have in terms of how to get the first pot of money. I think, EDB, ESG, IMDA has been doing a very good job over the past few years. Yes, they are. 5 years ago was nothing there, in a way. So I wish I just stay for another 2 years before I spun off. So I guess a lot of entrepreneurs here will also face the same challenge as me, find the product market fit. Singapore, yes, there are a lot of discussion about elder care. There's going to be a lot of opportunities, but to be honest, I don't think any more IMD or ESG people here, right? Okay, so I guess the first challenge that you have is get enough fundings to start off your idea. I guess there are fundings there, But I think you mentioned about having 2 kids. It's too late to become a start entrepreneur. In fact, when I solved my sound eye, I have 2 babies. That's 2 and 4 years old. So that's a very big challenge, in terms of fundings wise. So, but fortunately, A-STAR, NUS, the government agency here has been helping me a lot. If elder care doesn't work, they are advised that, hey, why not you try other domains first using the same technology? I think, for all of you here, if you're doing MedTech, some deep learning AI stuff, yes, it's good to be focused. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you better take care of yourself first before you, dive deep into there. Because I think my first mistake that I made is to focus on elder care. Elder care is very challenging. It's not just in Singapore, Denmark, as mentioned earlier, everywhere. Okay, so I'm pretty lucky that the same technology that I have can be used for other domains. In other words, I call it universal design. If you can design it for this age group, it can also be used for other age group as well. Why not? Right? Who will argue where the revenue comes from? It doesn't matter. But my heart is still back. In fact, Sound is a social enterprise. We got social enterprise because we are focusing on elder care as well. So my mentor was telling me, hey, you want to help the older adults? Yes, that's amazing. But you need to first take care of yourself first. If you can't stay afloat, please, you're in big trouble. So for the past 2 years, we have been exploring elder care. I'm still deploying my solution to nursing homes. I've been, still deploying to hospitals, to look after the residents as well as older adults inside there. But at the same time, I also get revenues from commercial buildings for surveillance kind of projects as well. So I guess, it's, for entrepreneur, that's a lot of job. You need to look at different domains. Yes, it's going to be tough. But to be honest, why not? You just have to work harder, that's all.
Can I elaborate on that?
Yeah, please.
Because I think you touched something that we also talked about yesterday when we had a conference about regarding elders and all the challenges that they are facing and how we can support them. And me being from Denmark and seeing some of the solutions that you guys are working with out here, and then know when I get back home to Denmark, I'll meet a lot of people that say, yeah, that might not work here because it's made out in Asia. There is this, what we call not invented here barrier that we face. If something is coming from outside and they want to bring it to Denmark, there might be a cultural barrier. And I know it's also working sometimes the other way around. But in my opinion, it's not existing. It's something in our head, because even though there are differences in our cultures, our basic needs and what we want are pretty much the same. What we fear and what our hopes are pretty much the same. Our need for technology and how we can use it, it's pretty much the same. So when you talk about moving your technology across disciplines, when you are talking about moving it across countries, I think you have to embrace yourself and power up and then go out and then convince people that we are not that different. You can actually move your ideas and your technology a lot easier. It's a question of mindset from the people that are going to use it. And it takes a bit of time, but I think it's important to take those steps.
There you go, Sound Eye. You just got another market.
Fantastic. So I guess let's loop back to this whole talent thing, right? We all know that I think talent is a big issue here in Singapore, and sounds like it's an issue in Denmark as well. I attended a talk by Josh McElroy from New Enterprise Associates just yesterday, I think. And he gave this analogy of ventures being trees. And as the venture goes, the tree grows, and eventually it matures, and when it matures, it drops all these seeds, maybe talent, maybe capability into the ecosystem. And those seeds then grow up to be big trees themselves. So if we use this analogy, and we talk maybe specifically about one of our portfolio companies, Bioformus, fantastic company, have just raised a 35 million B round, and they have moved their activities to Boston, right? Which is, okay, it's not an ideal outcome, but it's what they kind of had to do in this situation. How do we view this? Is this a tree being transplanted to someone else's garden that's not going to drop seeds here in Singapore? Is this there's still seeds that float back on the wind? Lisa, what's your kind of view on this?
Hi. So yes. So I think with regard to an enterprise and a business and its needs and where best those needs can be met, I think it's inevitable that the business would follow what makes sense for it. And in this case for Bioform is whether to set up an operation in Boston, but as I understand it, they also still have an operation here in Singapore. So I think actually moving forward, as the world gets smaller with technology, that we might see more of this model where a company, an innovative company, using data as a key ingredient in its work, would be able to form multiple sites, tapping on both Singapore as well as an area like Boston, and maybe in future an area like Denmark, and have multiple sites to then draw on the talent on each site, as well as the activities that make sense most for the company in those particular sites. So for example, if I think about medical technology and devices and trying to excuse me, target both the Asian market as well as, say, the European market, if the company is at a stage of its growth where it's possible for it to have an operation both here in Singapore as well as potentially, say, in Denmark for the European market, I think that might be a viable model going forward. And I think it's important that Singapore manages to keep the links with these companies that might started in Singapore and then moved on and grown and scaled in other places as well. Excuse my voice.
Yeah, but maybe I'll add on to that. I think we get a little bit too obsessed with equating value capture to actually, having legs on the ground here. I think value capture from the country perspective can come from many different aspects. The fact that we are able to spin out a company here, attract that kind of investments, and the company actually is now, gone to the States, do a lot of, market expansion. We hope that means that it will be very inspiring to more entrepreneurs. It gives them a lot more confidence, and it also gives a lot of credibility to more investors that they can invest in a company in Singapore, and it can have that sort of a big global market expansion perspective. So I think that in a way is really good. It's really good for our entrepreneur community. It's not necessarily that we want them to stay here forever. I mean, Singapore is really, I would see Singapore as a very good reference country, for especially in the area of medical. Medical obviously is a very, very, it's, as we all know, deals with healthcare and especially human healthcare, so very regulated. So that credibility, the track records, the reputation is very important, and maybe in that respect, very similar to Denmark. So especially for our footprint area in Asia, you have a product that's, that has a stamp of approval from Singapore, can go a long way when you take that to our neighboring country to say that you have HSA approval. And to be clear, HSA is really not the easiest regulatory, not the easiest as in not really bureaucratic, but not the easiest as in the bar, the technical evidence that they require. So that gives a lot of credibility to our companies. So I think we don't really, we shouldn't be too obsessed with Singapore being, really the only market that our companies or entrepreneurs need to stay in.
I agree, and I think that we can actually also educate in that area. We're trying to take our young students and learn them something about 5-minute favors. If someone is reaching out and they want to learn something and you can do it in less than 5 minutes, you have to do it. So when they grow older and perhaps get a company, they already had that mentorship with them. And hopefully they go to Boston, because if they have a company that is scalable and need to put their headquarters in Boston, then please do go to Boston. But remember them about their obligations and their mentorships. Keep reaching out to you. Your unit here, reach out, bring them back, celebrate them as heroes. And if they fail also bring them back and let them learn about the failures, because we have to also gain that knowledge and distribute that knowledge, so when we the next time send somebody to Boston, they don't fail. So in my opinion, I think we need to focus on learning our young startups to be mentors early on, because then we create the best VCs.
Coming back to the question of, as a startup's point of view, let's say, if we, for example, let's say, someone is able to go to China, we're going to set up a base in China rather than in Singapore, let's say. I think, at the end of the day, look at Razer. They came back to Singapore. They were outside. They came back because, they also, know where their roots is in a way. So I guess, I think as mentioned by Sydney, go out, learn, okay? Regardless whether they set up a base in Singapore or whatever, at the end of the day, Singapore will benefit in a way because, hey, we have raised a unicorn, etc., etc. This is a very great inspiration for students, especially for universities, because I'm very close to National University of Singapore. They have sent out students to go out and learn, make mistakes by all means, and then come back. So, even if, Razer, someone, whichever company set up a big base in Boston or China or etc., let them go first. Because as I mentioned earlier, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. You have to love yourself, before you can love other people as well. I mean, that's the basic of life. So for a startup, please, I think Singapore has been very good in dealing this. Go out, do your best. If possible, come back. That will be, that's a very good model here. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to just talk, got a quick question on Denmark. Martin, hopefully you can share, and then we can kind of wrap this up and talk about maybe opportunities to do things together that work for everyone. But can you tell me a little bit about, there's a comment in here that Denmark has the highest number of clinical trials per capita. It's something I didn't know. What's the kind of clinical trial scene? What's the first in human trials like in Denmark? Is it I'm sure there are ethical and quite high bars around this, but is there a lot of, is it quite easy to get these sort of things done?
Yeah, I think compared to many countries, it is quite easy. And it also has to do with our history with data. Because we have had health records going more than 50 years back, meaning that doing clinical trials has been many times related to our collection of data. So it's quite easy to set up studies because we already had a system where we can pull some of the data. And also if you want to implement or collect new types of data, it can also be often implemented on top of the existing system, meaning that the organizations were aware that this was one of the things that they should contribute to when you work in the healthcare sector, to support research and innovation, meaning to bring the data that can support the outcome and measure the effects, so we are not putting something out in the healthcare sector that's not based on evidence. So that's based on our tradition and the way that we run the healthcare sector and our history with the electronic health records. I'm not saying that it's always easy, because we're also having a healthcare sector that is focusing on productivity, and if you want to implement something that is taking too much time and collect data in a way that they are not used to, or that is putting a constraint on their everyday work, you have to have good arguments or money to make it work. And I think that's the same all over the world. But I think the main foundation is quite good to do testing and do also initial exploratory tests, if you, of course, can fulfill the regulatory demands that are in those areas.
So yeah, it does sound exciting, doesn't it?
No, it's like I want to start working with you. Yeah.
So I think I mean it's 4:20 now, and I think we need to finish. I think on the dot. Sydney's got to go off to her next appointment. But I think I would really like to finish this with a good discussion about opportunities to do things together. I think knowing now, well, having a discussion about what the respective countries are good at, some of the shared challenges that we have, maybe some of the challenges Singapore has in comparison to Denmark. I would like to kind of get, maybe I'll start with Sydney and Lisa, but opportunities for collaboration or things that we can learn from Denmark from a Singapore perspective and a Singapore startup perspective.
So actually, just listening to what Martin was talking about was really exciting. I'm like already thinking in my head, why are we not already working with you guys? Especially where DXCR is concerned, every single one of our projects, every single one, and we do a lot. We've gone through 400, almost 500 projects, and at any one time we work on about 40 to 50 projects at any one time. And every single one of our projects involves clinicians. And I'm just thinking, actually, I don't think we do anything with Denmark, and that actually is the first thing that I'm going to do. Go back and go and talk to Denmark, and there's a lot of things that we can do looking at multi-site, clinical studies together. Obviously, there's a lot more that both sides can gain over the fact that we can speed up and we can, have a multi-site. But there's also that extra perspective of the different phenotypes where population is concerned. Something that would be very interesting. So directly relevant to what we do. And that's really from the DXCR perspective. And of course, from the A-Star perspective, we have a much broader portfolio of companies for many different technology areas, not just MedTech. And we could also look at how that, but I suppose from the challenge perspective, maybe in the healthcare area, it's a lot more relevant because that is very regulated and it takes a lot more the know-how of the localized entity, the localized partner to navigate the system of getting the IRB, getting the clinical design going, and getting the clinical KOLs. So that would be a very, very helpful collaborations that we can think of.
Great.
Thank you for making this possible.
Oh, I don't think it's me who's making this possible. I think it's the Embassy of Denmark.
Yep.
Lisa, what about you?
I think similarly to Sydney, I mean, when you mentioned that you have the most number of clinical trials per capita, I think that's really exciting because I think when companies make a product for a global market, Singapore captures quite a good spectrum of the Asian ethnicities because you have the ethnic Chinese that are quite reminiscent of the Han Chinese, the Indian population that represents the South Asian population, and the Malays that represent kind of this region. And I think then having a clinical trial network that includes Denmark with the Danish population, I think in and of itself, a clinical trial network approach could be interesting. In addition to that, I was also quite interested to hear that you're also starting your genomics approach in Denmark. And in Singapore, there's also planning for a precision medicine initiative. So I think there again capturing on the diversity, because oftentimes the genetic diversity and the variants that you're calling that has any kind of clinical relevance, you're not really sure whether it is really directly pathogenic or whether it is actually a variant that's associated with an ethnicity, right? So you see these differences, and a lot of, I think those kind of questions would of course also be very interesting. And I think the main value in genomic data is when you're able to pull that with phenotypic data, because genomic data is just a bunch of AGTCs, but if you're able to pull that with your clinical data and your medical records, then you have a fuller picture of understanding how your genomic information affects your health. And I think we have much to learn from Denmark on this front with your long history with the electronic records, and try and understand and journey together perhaps to understand how you bring the genomic data with your medical information, because I think that intersection is what's going to make the genomic data most valuable. Yep, so maybe those two areas.
Great. And Yao Ki, from your perspective as an entrepreneur?
I think over the past few years, Singapore has been building more and more hospitals. How come Denmark is building less and less hospitals? Why is that so? That's amazing, by the way. So I guess, few things that we can learn from Denmark is, we have to strategize that hospital business model doesn't work anymore. Because as everyone ages, in terms of economy kind of, stature, we need to learn from other countries. I guess Singapore can learn a lot from Denmark as well, in terms of that part. Elder care was amazing back in Denmark as well. Here, we're starting to build whatever capability that we have for elder care. Sorry, I'm also a associate in SUSS. So I'm very advocate on older adults. So I guess a lot of things we can learn from them. Okay, so I guess in Singapore we are building towards a very exciting future right now, but we still need to learn a lot from other countries at the same time, in a way. Whatever was discussed here, I'm very excited to use whatever the data that they have along with my technology. Who knows? Probably you can find new use cases as well. Yeah, for a startup, the last thing that you're afraid is you don't have enough use cases. Finding use cases should be your top number priority. Finding problems to solve, that's your top number one priority as well. Okay, so since there are problems here and there, the next thing is having enough data to make sense of what we're going to do as well. Yeah.
So Martin, I know this is your second trip to Singapore. You've been here 3 days. You've been to a few conferences, and now with today, what do you see as some opportunities to really strengthen our relationship and collaborate on in terms of taking MedTech to market?
I will not elaborate on the data because we completely agree. We can learn a lot from each other there, and I think we should try to do that. So I'll try to be perhaps a bit provocative and say the most expensive healthcare sector in the world is the US. When we have a startup, they often aim to go to the US because there's a lot of money to gain if you can penetrate into the American market. But if you look into the future, I'm not sure that the sustainability of the American healthcare sector is there. So why is it that we are not learning more from each other based on what is return on investment if a Danish company is coming into your country as a beachhead to Asia? And the other way around, why don't we put up relations so we can help Asian companies to penetrate into the European market? Because the healthcare sector, both places are costly, but they're not as costly as they are in the US. The market and running MedTech devices that can actually support and decrease costs are sought after, asked for. So I think we have a possibility to try to make a bridge between Asia and Europe, because I'm not sure that in a few years' time the US is the right place to go if you want to put up startup.
I absolutely agree. Actually, I spent the last few years trying to tell our startups that we really should be focusing more on our own footprint area. And I do actually see that I've been involved with the startup ecosystem since, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years ago. And I do see a shift of the mentality of the entrepreneurs. It used to be that the first thing they want to go is actually the US. Now actually I do see a slight difference. A lot of them are now saying that we want to expand in Asia. So I think the key is really to make sure that we are right smack in the middle of Asia. If you want to be a little bit more localized, we talk about ASEAN. And ASEAN is 700 million, it's pretty big as well. So it's really important from the startup perspective to really make sure that we're very good in our footprint area. Don't go and fight in other people's backyard. Because once we are very good here, anybody that needs to come here actually needs to play with us.
Yeah, I think that where we focus our efforts, whether it's on the US or on the region, it could be the topic of a whole nother discussion. Yeah. It's something that I've been thinking about and quite passionate about as well. But I think that's all we have for today. So I would like you all to join me in thanking the Embassy of Denmark, Ambassador Dorte, and our fantastic panelists here today. Thank you all so much for coming down on Friday afternoon. Please stay for some networking.
Very brief. I don't think I got your name card. I don't have my name card with me, but I have
Hey, pleasure. Yeah, please, pleasure. Hi. Hi. Oh, fantastic.
that's a great talk. I Google you quickly. I'm CM. I'm quite impressed. PhD in telemedicine. Wow, that's really cool. So actually, we are in telemedicine space. We are Biorhythm, a local startup in women health, focusing on pregnancies.
I have a project that are closely related to pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what is it about? Is it remote monitoring as well, or?
No, we educate healthcare providers.
Okay.
Safe delivery.
Oh, fantastic.
So we